You hear so much about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but think about it. When have you ever heard the opinion of an average Israeli? Not a politician, not an activist from the far left or far right, but a middle-of-the-road Israeli. My name is Oren, I'm an Israeli tour guide, and I'm your average Israeli with an MA in Israeli history. In this video, I will be talking about the occupation, settlements, and refugees. But first, let's start with the Palestinian narrative. They will tell you that in the beginning there were the Palestinians, and among them were some Jews who lived peacefully alongside the Muslims. Under the umbrella of colonialism, the Zionist movement started to bring Jews to Palestine and steal land from the locals, which led to rounds of violence between the two sides. This escalated into a war in which the Jews carried out massive deportations, which in turn led to today's problem of 5 million Palestinian refugees. Now, narratives are great, but facts and truth are even better. The land of Israel has a long history. The Canaanites were here, the Persians, the Israelites, the Turks, the Mamluks, the French, the British, and the Germans in the Crusaders era, the Romans, the Greek. There was never a Palestinian people in the land of Israel. Yes, there were Arabs, and I will get to that, but never a group of people that called themselves Palestinians. If you think that I'm wrong, then please tell me when it existed. Was it in the 12th century, the 17th century? Show me a coin that they used. Tell me the name of a Palestinian leader in the 15th century. You can't, because there wasn't. Now, some name Dar el-Omar as a Palestinian leader, but that's not true either. Dar el-Omar was a talented Bedouin ruler of the Galilee when it was under corrupted, neglected Ottoman rule. He rebelled against the empire and formed an autonomous zone in the Galilee until he was murdered by his soldiers. If he is all the Palestinians have to prove that there was a Palestinian people, they have very little. The land of Israel was neglected, impoverished, and corrupted under Turkish rule for 400 years. And before that, it was part of the Mamluk Empire, which was based in Egypt. Here is an interesting fact. When Muslims ruled the land of Israel, Jerusalem was never the capital. It was always Cairo, Damascus, or Baghdad. When Jews and Christians ruled the land of Israel, Jerusalem was always the heart, always the capital. This makes sense, as Jerusalem is mentioned hundreds of times in the Jewish Bible and in the New Testament, but in the Quran, Jerusalem isn't mentioned even once. The Quran is mostly about Mecca and Medina in Saudi Arabia. I'm not saying that God gave this land to the Jews. I'm pointing out a simple, indisputable fact. The holiest sites for Jews and Christians are in the land of Israel. The holiest places for Muslims are in Saudi Arabia. Now let's move on and talk about colonialism. And here I'm going to surprise you. Unlike the colonialist powers which simply took over land, the Jews bought every piece of land they settled on. Until the Arabs started a war against us, 100% of the Jewish settlements were on Jewish land. You don't agree with me? Prove me wrong. Write me in the comments below, Oren, in 1936, the village X was established on stolen Arab land. You won't be able to find a single example. Now, if you're thinking, well, the Jews came along with all their money and bought the poor locals out, then you're wrong. The Jews bought the swampland that nobody wanted. There is an unbelievable correlation between the land suggested to be made into a Jewish state in the UN partition plan and the areas where people suffered from malaria. The Zionist pioneers, with tremendous amount of hard work and innovation, turned the swampland into gold. And Zionist doctors made an important contribution by fighting malaria around the world. Before I say a word about the Palestinians and colonialism, let's briefly mention a country nearby, Jordan. Jordan is the result of British colonialism. It is an artificial country that was made by the British. The British said to one of the sons of the king of Hijaz in Saudi Arabia, "Help us fight against the Turks, and we will create a land for you to rule." That is the story of Jordan. I have nothing against Jordanians, but if you tell me that the country of Jordan is ancient and not the product of British colonialism, I will tell you you're wrong. The same goes for the Palestinians. The name Palestine was given to the land of Israel by the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago to punish the Jews after the rebellion known as the Bar Kokhba revolt, which took place in 135. So the name was created by a colonialist empire 2,000 years ago, and the modern borders around this name were created by the British Empire 100 years ago. Why is an Arab born in the north of the Galilee considered a Palestinian, whereas if he's born a few kilometers to the north, he's considered to be Lebanese? Because the British and the French, two European colonial empires, drew a line that later became the border between Israel and Lebanon. Colonialism is the best thing that ever happened to the Palestinians. You know why? Because British colonialism invented the Palestinian people. Palestinians are a product of colonialism. They got their name from the Roman Empire, and their borders were drawn up by the British Empire, and it doesn't end there. Everybody knows that Jews migrated to the land of Israel, but nobody talks about the huge numbers of Arabs who migrated to the land of Israel. The British and the Jews brought innovation and prosperity to the land of Israel, and Arabs from Egypt, Transjordan, and Syria came to improve their lives under British rule, as today with Western Europe. Muslims prefer to be refugees in Christian countries, not Muslim countries. One Hamas leader admits that more than 50% of Palestinians in Gaza are originally Egyptian. The real numbers are much higher. So why is it that a Jew who came to Israel in the 20s is part of a colonialist project, but an Arab who came from Syria to work in Haifa in the 40s is considered a local indigenous Palestinian? And by the way, in the beginning of the 20th century, it was the Jews who were referred to as Palestinians, and the Arabs called themselves Arabs. But what about the Palestinian refugees, the occupation, the illegal Israeli settlements? What do Israelis have to say about that? So let's start with the refugees. In 1947, the United Nations said, let's divide the land into a Jewish state where the Jews live and an Arab state where the Arab live. And by the way, in all of the documents written at that time, whether by Arab countries or by the UN, they talk about an Arab state and not a Palestinian state. Anyway, the Jews agreed, and then the Arabs started a war to annihilate the Jews. The first act undertaken by the Arabs after the UN partition plan was a shooting on a bus that killed 5 Jewish civilians. Luckily, we won. If we had lost, there would be no Jewish refugees, only Jewish graves. As a result of the fighting, about 500,000 Arabs left their homes and became refugees in neighboring Arab countries. Some left because they were afraid of the fighting taking place around them. Some were evacuated by Arab military leaders, and some were deported by the Israelis. Yes, in some places, Israelis deported Arabs. But let's take a look at what happened on the other side. In territories that the Arab conquered, no Jew was left alive. If I'm not mistaken, there are only 3 places where Jews fell into captivity and stayed alive: the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem, Nitzanim, and Gush Etzion. And no Jews continue to live in areas that were controlled by the Arabs, whereas tens of thousands of Arabs were allowed to stay in the Jewish state. I want to zoom out for a second to focus on a very important point regarding refugees in those years. As a result of World War I and World War II, empire collapsed, and the idea of nation being self-determined became the norm. The Zionist movement was one of these national movements, one of many. In the process of the creation of nation states, tens of millions of people were evacuated and deported. 12 million Germans were evacuated after the war. Poland and Ukraine had 1.4 million civilians move from one side to the other. Turkey, Greece has 2 million deported. In the Balkans, about 7 million were forced to move. India and Pakistan had 14 million people evacuated. All these examples came about with tremendous amount of violence and left millions dead. Do you know how many of the 60 million people who were forced to leave their houses in the 40s are today considered to be refugees by the UN? None. 0. Do you know what the world calls a third-generation German refugee? A German. Do you know what a third-generation Indian refugee is called today? An Indian. Only those Arabs who left Palestine are still considered to be refugees, as are their sons and their grandsons and their great-great-grandsons, which is why today there are 10 times more Palestinian refugees than there were 70 years ago. The Arabs can call themselves whatever they want. They want to be called Palestinians, sure, why not? But let's not abuse the term refugees. Let's reserve it for those in real need, for the real refugees, and not use it for a group of people who insist on holding on to this title of victimhood for 3 generations. The UN refugee policy is a joke that you are paying for. Now you might be saying, yeah, well, just because atrocities happens elsewhere, that doesn't mean Israel isn't responsible for its own crimes. But wait a second. The world loves talking about the Palestinian refugees. Academia has dedicated 1,000 times more articles and courses to them than to any other group that was forced to leave because of war. And let's just add a quick word about a group of refugees that you've probably never heard about, and that is Jews in Arab countries. Jews in Arab countries suffered pogroms and hundreds were murdered by their Arab neighbors. The front page headline in the New York Times a day after the establishment of the State of Israel was about the grave danger that the Jews in Arab countries would now be facing. Hundreds of thousands of Jews from Morocco, Tunisia, Yemen, and Iraq had to flee to Israel after having had to endure an onslaught of violence against them. Israel built refugees camp for these Jews. The thing is that in Israel, we don't call them refugees, as when a Jew comes to Israel, he's not a refugee, but a Jew who is coming home. 800,000 Jews had to flee from Arab countries, which is many more than the 500,000 Palestinian refugees. Jewish property and land that was confiscated by Arab countries is at least 5 times more than what the Palestinians left behind in Israel. So to conclude this topic, I will say that not only were more Jews forced to evacuate, having to leave behind much more property, but also it was the Arabs who started the war in Israel, and the Arabs persecuted the Jews in Arab countries. I have used a lot of different facts and figures here, and people who don't agree with me usually question my facts. I won't provide links to every fact I've mentioned, as this is a YouTube video and not a university paper, but all the facts that I've given here are very basic and easy to check. There is a website that I absolutely love. It is called Google, and you can type in questions like, how many refugees did the partition of India cost? Or in which Muslim country it is okay to be gay? None. Or pogroms in Iraq against Jews, and get answers to your questions. If you want to dive deeper, I can recommend the articles and books of Ben Dror Yemini. I will provide a link to his materials. And now let's talk about the occupation. But first, let's establish which occupation we are talking about, because most Arabs see the existence of the Jewish state in Israel as an occupation of Muslim land. The first sentence in the Hamas constitution is, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it, which is very far from, let's have peace. They don't talk about a Palestinian state, but rather they want a Muslim empire. And even the PLO, which stands for Palestine Liberation Organization, was established in 1964, 3 years before the 1967 occupation. So basically, when Arabs talk about occupation, they are against the existence of a Jewish state. I hope that you don't support the Arabs on this one. In 1967, the Arabs threatened to eliminate Israel again, and they lost again. In the media, the area that is in dispute is called the West Bank, but the term West Bank, like the term Palestinians, is very new and was only invented a few decades ago. We prefer to use the name that has been used for thousands of years, Judea and Samaria. The vast majority of Arabs living in Judea and Samaria live under the control of the Palestinian Authority, not under Israeli occupation. Now, most Israelis are against settlements on private-owned Arab land, while being for Israelis living in Judea and Samaria. Here are the Israeli arguments. What do we want us Israelis to do? Withdraw and say, come on, try to eliminate us again? Jews lived in Hebron for hundreds of years until they were murdered by Arabs. So why is it that Arabs can live freely in Jerusalem and Israel and Jews are not allowed to live in Hebron? Why should Judea and Samaria be free of Jews? The Palestinians shouldn't be rewarded for their violence toward Jews. And if the Israeli army needs to protect the Jews in Hebron, so be it. I lived in Germany for many years, and if I had an euro for every time I heard the word Siedlungspolitik, I wouldn't have to ask you to buy me a beer at the end of this video. Siedlungspolitik is the politics of Israeli settlements in the West Bank. This is something of an obsession for the German media and for many other countries as well, I'm sure. I find it really arrogant and patronizing to have so many Europeans and Americans telling us that we are the obstacles to peace. Do you have a solution to or an opinion on the war in Syria or Yemen or Afghanistan or Libya too? Or is it only when it comes to Israel that you are so certain that the Israeli settlements are the root to all problems? Now, I'm a rational person. If you were to tell me, Oren, the settlements are the biggest obstacle to peace, I would say, let's see. The Arabs were violent towards the Jews before 1948 and after 48, before 67 and after 67, before the settlements and after the settlements. Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip. There is not a single Jew in Gaza anymore. And by the way, there was a Jewish community in Gaza, ancient community. But are we closer to peace today? I don't think so. In the Khartoum Resolution in 1967, before the settlements, the Arab leaders declared no peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiation with it. The settlements are not the problem. So what is the heart of the problem? If it is not the occupation or the settlements or the refugee problem, then what is it? To understand the real problem as Israelis see it, you need to zoom out. Israelis see a straight line connecting the Muslim violence in Afghanistan to the terrible war in Syria, to the Palestinian, to the terror attack in Europe. If almost all of the 50-plus Muslim countries aren't democratic, it doesn't say anything good about Muslim society. If there is no freedom of speech in Muslim countries, it doesn't give them points. If being gay is illegal in Muslim countries, if women are seen as a property of the patriarchal family, if all minorities in Muslim countries are suffering and shrinking, I find it unbelievable that the persecution of Christians in Muslim countries get almost zero coverage in the media. More than 50,000 Christians have been murdered by Muslims in recent years in Nigeria alone. Have you heard about that? The situation is absolutely insane. Israel evacuates Arabs who haven't paid any rent for 30 years from 20 houses that belong to Jews in Sheikh Jarrah, a mostly Arab neighborhood in Jerusalem, and a majority starts to scream about ethnic cleansing. Now, my English is not great, but if the numbers of Arabs in Jerusalem, in Israel, in Gaza, and in Judea and Samaria is growing, should we not maybe use a different term? Maybe we should apply the term ethnic cleansing not to what the Jews are doing to the Muslim, but what the Muslims are doing to the Christians. The Middle East used to be full of ancient Christian communities. They are all disappearing. Or more accurate, they are being eliminated by Muslims. If the Muslim world is drowning in a sea of violence, then I will not say good thing about this society, and I will not balance my criticism with, they make great hummus. There is an Australian stand-up comedian, Jim Jeffries, very liberal, very funny, and in one of his shows he says something like, let's laugh about religions, let's laugh about Jews. And the crowd cheers, and he tells his joke, and then he says, let's laugh about Muslims. And then there is a complete silence. The moment of silence in this big hall screams the truth louder than 1,000 articles in Al Jazeera. The reaction of the crowd is genuine, as they can't control it. They can't apply the political correctness filters. You know you can laugh about the Jews because Jews in Israel, in the US, in Europe, are less violent, and no Jew will attack you for criticizing Jews or Judaism. But once he mentions Muslims, it's a different story. Are there Muslims who want democracy and free speech and who think that gays shouldn't be thrown into jail? Yes, of course there are. But sadly, they are a minority with no power. There were also some great Germans in the 30s and some nice Russians under Stalin. And yet I wouldn't say anything good about Nazis or communists. The Arab Spring, also known in Israel as the Muslim Winter, is a great example of how bad the situation in Muslim society is. Only in Tunisia did the country become more democratic. Other than that, they failed everywhere, in the Middle East and in North Africa, in the Sunni countries and in the Shia countries, in the rich countries and in the poor countries, in the Arab countries and in the Muslim countries. No democracy, no women's right, no gay right, and by gay rights I mean the right to have the head connected to the rest of the body, no freedom of speech, nothing, only dictatorship, civil wars, chaos and hate. Peace will only come when two things happen. First, when the Arab world recognizes a Jewish state in the land of Israel, and second, when Muslim society is democratic, less violent, and more tolerant of Jews, Christians, and independent women. This is, in general, the average Israeli opinion. I think it makes sense. If you agree with me, please give this video a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and help me share the truth. If you like my content and want to see more videos like this, please consider buying me a beer or two or become a member in buymeacoffee.com. I will leave all the links below. See you in the next video. Yalla bye.